Hi, welcome to the Discourse Collective. Today we're going to be talking about the Ukraine conflict with Russia, and we're going to be looking at the different factors involved. Is it Russia's fault only? Are imperialist factors at play? Is there some kind of new world order being created as we speak by America? Let's look into it. Okay, so first off, I want to start this video really by just remembering that we need to keep in mind that this is a humanitarian disaster at all times. That has to be really front and center of the question. There are people suffering, there are people dying, and that needs to be remembered. But it doesn't mean that has to be the only thing that we think about. We need to be looking at other aspects, and we need to be carefully examining what information is being given to us and how it's being given to us and who by, and what other factors they might not actually be telling us about. It's important to remember that there isn't just one side here, there's many. There's Russia, there's NATO, there's Ukraine, there's America, there's the UK, there's Europe, and there's other players further afield, China, for example, India, all of who are having a say in this conflict as it unravels. And we need to remember that each of those is going to come with a kind of agenda, and a whole history and a set of things that we need to be thinking about when we look at the kind of information that's getting to us through the mass media, etc. Now, there's nobody that's totally unbiased in any of this. Everyone is going to be coming at this with a lens, and that's going to colour and change the way it gets to you. And so it's really important that we're just aware of that, and we kind of have the conversation with that in mind. Let's just take a look at some of the main players. I'm going to start with America because I think they have actually a bigger role than many people assume. They're not a direct combatant, and they've said they won't be a direct combatant, and that makes perfect sense. It almost certainly would start a nuclear conflict were they to actually send troops or actually interfere directly in the conflict. We need to think of the fact that America is undoubtedly using this as an excuse to weaken an age-old enemy. The bear at the door has been there for the last 70 years for America, and it's almost undoubtable that they are strategizing and trying to find ways to use this to their advantage to weaken Russia. I don't think anyone could even deny that. I think that's clear that that's what they're doing. They will soften that message with messages around the fact they're trying to help the Ukrainian people, and that might be a side effect of what they end up doing. But underlying that strategy is going to be an attempt to, soften up Russia. So we need to think about the EU, and we need to think about what stakes they have in this conflict. Obviously, they're guarding their eastern flank here, and they are very carefully eyeing the memberships of that region. The other factor involved, of course, is energy supply. Much of the EU gets a great deal of its gas and oil from Russia. The Nord 2 pipeline, that is now effectively shelved, possibly cancelled. And we need to consider really the energy factor is definitely something that needs to be looked at. There has been a long time where we've known that Russia was unlikely to be a stable trading partner for the long term, and yet somehow EU have just ignored that, and they've continued without really figuring out a way of moving away from Russian energy. They've just continued to take it and even encouraged it, and that, I think, is bordering on negligent, actually, when you stop and think about it. And it makes it very difficult for effective sanctions to be put in place when you're taking away with one hand and you're giving with the other. So that, I think, is an embarrassment for the EU, and I think something that needs to be addressed. NATO are taking a pretty militaristic standpoint, which is, as you'd expect, they're a military organisation, more or less, by stating that an independent and sovereign Ukraine is key to Euro-Atlantic security. And obviously, that means that they want to bring the Ukraine into a stable situation. Now, Ukraine are now saying that they're actually probably going to end up as independent. That's one of the bargaining chips in current negotiations. And really, that's understandable from the Ukrainian perspective, because if the Ukraine were to join NATO, it might make things even worse for them in the short term and maybe even the long term. Now, the UK, which is where I'm from, is just a Russian money pit. It was covered with a great deal of humour by Jonathan Pye recently for his piece he did with the New York Times. That is a really unpleasant situation. The UK government have more or less ushered in the Russian upper elite, the oligarchs, and Russian money by extension. They've ushered that in, and they've allowed billions of pounds of UK and London property to be bought up by the Russians. Now, stop and think for a moment. What do you often see? You often see information and news about Russian oligarchs going and visiting Putin. Why do you think Putin's having those meetings? Do you think possibly that Putin is asking those oligarchs to buy, purchase, or act in ways that are going to favour Russia? I think that's a possibility. I think that's more than a possibility. I think that's almost certainly what's going on. And so by allowing Russians to buy property in London willy-nilly, we have weakened our position in a lot of different ways when it comes to dealing with somebody like Putin. We've just let them in through the front door, and we've given them a huge bargaining chip. And that is a huge shame and a pretty big embarrassment, I would say. So Russia, of course, started this conflict in effect. The reasons for that start are still being mulled over. But I don't think it's really any surprise to people that Putin has done this. He did it previously. He started to invade areas of the Ukraine. Don't be fooled by the rhetoric of him saying that they're independent states. That's just simply not true. It's a pretext for invasion. It's no secret that Putin has got a nasty case of the revanchisms. He was stated on file as having, by the Kremlin, as having said, above all, we should acknowledge that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a major geopolitical disaster of the century. As for the Russian nation, it became a genuine drama. Tens of millions of our co-citizens and co-patriots found themselves outside Russian territory. Moreover, the epidemic of disintegration infected Russia itself. Now, that makes it pretty clear where Putin's priorities lie. He, again, has said on record that he views the breakup of the USSR as a terrible point in Russian history and something he would like to correct. Now, that would indicate that he wants to start bringing those states back into the Russian fold. Those states don't want to be in the Russian fold anymore. It's been 20, 25 years since they were in the Russian fold, and so 30. So we really do need to sort of think about what he might do in the future as well. That's definitely something that needs to be considered. You have to consider the man himself, Putin. I mean, this is not a man who does things by halves. This is not a man who's liable to play by the rules. He's not a man who's likely to envelop himself in the way that the West do things. The guy murders and poisons his opposition. I mean, look at Salisbury. He nearly took out an entire town in his attempts to kill one ex-military staffer who became a double agent against Russia for the UK. Now, I'm directly attacking Putin at this point, and I'm sorry, I don't want to dance around it, but there is no way he would have been separated from this incident. He would have given some kind of okay for that operation to take place. And frankly, the buck stops here. If you're going to be head of state, then you need to take the fall for things like that. So yes, I'm directing that directly at Putin. There's also crazy situations where the Russian police are arresting people for holding up blank pieces of paper. I'm going to take a look at this video.
Так, кто-то парень идет на рожон, вышел с пустой бумажкой.
Молодец!
То есть у молодого человека чистый лист бумаги в руках.
Что это у вас за листок?
Что показать? Чистый листок бумаги.
Для какой цели?
Целью. Первый листочек. Целью выразить.
Я вас уведомляю о том, что в соответствии с постановлением губернатора Новосибирской области номер 72-Б от 18 марта 2020 года, также постановление губернатора Новосибирской области от 9 февраля 2022 года, номер 40П, публичные мероприятия, любые публичные мероприятия на территории Новосибирской области, в том числе одиночные пикетирования, которые, так понимаю, вы сейчас совершаете, запрещены. При непрекращении ваших противоправных действий вы будете подвергнуты административному наказанию, предусмотренному статьей 20.6.1. Требую немедленно прекратить ваши противоправные действия. Повторяю, требую прекратить ваши противоправные действия.
Продолжаю.
Можно я это? Куда вы его толкаете?
Все, забрали. Вот такие действия полиции, если человек выходит даже с пустой чистой бумажкой, с чистым листом, без всяких лозунгов.
I mean, you can see here that all the guy's doing is holding up a blank piece of paper. That's it. That's all he's doing. And the Russian police arrest him, and you see them quote the statute books there for the city, which is they're arresting him even of a picket, an individual picket, one person. Now, what does that tell you about the mindset of the Russian authorities, the mindset of the power structure in Russia? It tells you they're petrified. It tells you they're terrified of their people. Now, in any situation where the government or the authoritarian force of a country are petrified of their own people, that does not scream legitimacy. That does not scream stability. That screams authoritarian regime. And I think that's the only way you can look at Russia right now. And it might sound like an extreme viewpoint, but you've effectively got a state that's been taken over by terrorists. I mean, it sounds extremely out there, but frankly, what else would you call it? This guy's making, threats of pushing the big red nuclear button pretty much every press conference he does. He's making it absolutely clear they won't count out nuclear threat. Now, what kind of person uses a nuclear threat with that kind of occurrence, that rapidity of occurrence? What kind of person does that? Oh yeah, I'm just going to threaten you with nukes. Anytime I don't get what I want, I'm going to threaten you with nukes. That is unacceptable on the world stage. And we're going to come back to the world stage in a moment when we start talking about some of the things that Biden has said. Biden recently gave a press conference and he mentioned the killer phrase, New World Order. Now, that was like literally a red rag to a bull. It was like a steak to a dog. The internet went crazy, literally New World Order, bang, he said it. Look at this, he actually said it. He said he wants a New World Order. He also said that he wanted regime change. He said he didn't feel that Putin could stay in power. Immediately, that has caused some people in different areas of the internet to sort of start shouting, well, look, we've been telling you this was going to happen. We've been telling you. So cue frantic shouts, really, from like every corner of the internet where you find these type of commentators. They frequently will use the word themselves, conspiracy theorists. You can call them alternative narrative outlets if you want. You can call them independent thinkers. I mean, you tell me what you think the best term is below. But one thing is for sure, they pretty much all of them jumped on this idea that, well, look, we've been telling you there was going to be a New World Order. We were telling you that the Americans will be pushing for a New World Order, pole to pole New World Order. And look, here it is, it's coming. Now, we need to, at this point, really think about what we're talking about when we say New World Order. Are you surprised that the Americans want a New World Order? What do the Americans actually want? Think about it. They want a pole-to-pole situation where every country on the globe is a reliable trading partner with America, will buy American goods at a fair price, and will sell American goods at a fair price, that is not in conflict with America, that has similar ideals to the American ideals, and that's a separate subject. And of course it's natural that that's what they want. And of course it's natural that countries that don't adhere to that are more pushed back against, and even there's enmity towards those countries. Russia's an example. China's an example. Iran, Syria, Yemen. These are examples of countries that don't fit the American ideal. And yes, the Americans are known for regime change. I can't remember. I think that they've attempted regime change 120 times. In the last 50 years. This is what they do. They try to change the world in ways that are beneficial to America. Now, that's not a conspiracy theory. At no point would any sane person have ever said anything different. This is what countries do. They try to make the rest of the world a bit more in the vision of the way they want it. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's just fact. So when Biden says New World Order, what he means is a New World Order where you don't have people like Putin threatening to push the red button just because they don't get to take over their neighbouring countries without anybody raising a fuss. So let's not pretend that New World Order is some scary, terrifying thing run by lizard men. It's not. It is just a way of expressing the idea that wouldn't the world be a better place if it wasn't covered in these little spots of countries that want to basically ruin everybody else's day. I'm not saying the West is perfect, and I'm not saying Russia's wrong and the West is right. I'm not saying anything like that. The West is in a mess right now. America specifically is in a mess. They are, again, effectively a corporate country now. They're barely a democracy. It's a non-functional democracy in America right now. This two-party solution is not a solution. It's a cabal. And we need to look at things that are happening in America with a very careful eye. I mean, look at this quote by Trump. He actually said that. He said that 3 days before he was elected president of the United States. People still went and voted for him. He didn't deny it. He agreed he'd said it. He even apologised. In one of the very rare incidences where Trump apologised for anything, he apologised for that. And yet people still voted him in. And that is not a functioning democracy. I'm sorry. I know you think everyone has got a vote and anyone should be able to vote for who they want, but that is not a functioning democracy. When somebody like that becomes president of the United States, the system is utterly broken. And it's broken in other ways. The recent attempt to unionize Amazon, there are cases here of the police department arresting on behalf of Amazon. They are arresting the ringleaders in the attempt to create a unionized workforce, the first Amazon unionized workforce in the United States. They are attempting to arrest the ringleaders, and they're shouting, "We won." The police aren't supposed to shout things like "we won." They're not playing a game. They're supposed to be independent. And if you want any further indication that America has been effectively bought out by corporations like Amazon, there it is. That's it. So again, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a fact. America is in effect a corporate state. It is now basically being bought and paid for by people like Bezos. Police forces are not independent in America. They have agendas, and they will work to agendas. They're effective in this case. They're basically the Pinkertons. They're the Amazon Pinkerton force. And if you think that isn't an indication of an utterly broken country, then you're probably wrong. Let's look at the agenda of these voices, of these other voices, of these, I don't know what to call them, independent thinkers for the sake of argument. What they often have in common is that they want a world that is smaller and more independent and more individual and more flexible and more akin to the needs of the individual, where the individual has transparency and capability and agency for change and to live the life they want to live without these huge pressure forces coming from the likes of authoritarian governments, from bankrupt corporations or morally bankrupt corporations, from police forces that have no real oversight and can do whatever they want. These are the forces that these type of voices want to fight out against and want to back out against, and who can blame them? It's an unpleasant situation to think that basically we're dealing with a bought media, entire countries that have been bought by large corporations and authoritarian regimes. This is an unpleasant situation. And yes, it's natural in those situations to want to go backwards to a simpler time when we lived in small pockets of like-minded individuals in small communities that were able to, live the lives they wanted in a way that made sense to them. But let's actually stop and look at that. Is that even possible? This kind of anti-collectivism, this anti-globalization message that tends to come from these types of voices is an agenda. That's an agenda. They're looking at things with a lens of wanting to go back to a more independent, to a smaller way of living. But everything great that mankind has been achieved because of globalization. Putting a man on the moon would have been impossible. It cost, the man-hour cost was 10,000 people for 10 years. It's not possible to do that in a situation where everyone's living in small independent enclaves. the internet would be impossible. In fact, any large-scale change we want to make to this planet must be done on a global level, and that is going to lead to globalization. It's not practical to think that we can go back to a situation where we all lived in small independent enclaves, living in the way we want, because frankly, we've gone too far now. It's entirely possible that situation will be forced upon us, bear in mind. If there was some kind of global catastrophe, we may be forced back into that type of living. But by that time, Amazon and Putin will be distant memories. So what do human beings do? In every situation, we grow. We move from a hunter-gatherer society to a farming agricultural society. We moved into villages, towns. Any small company becomes a big company. That's normally the aim. Small villages become big towns. This is what human beings do. We grow, we expand. Our population would indicate that we're in no hurry to reduce ourselves in major numbers quickly. And go back to a simpler way of living. And so we have to consider that it's actually an impossibility to go back to any kind of decentralized, individualistic society. We've gone too far for that. We are, like it or not, a global society now. But in all of this, in all of the looking at different perspectives, in all of the looking at different viewpoints and different agendas, we need to bring it back finally to finish this video to the fact that there are right now people suffering, there are people injured, there are people dying, there are people losing their livelihoods and their homes, their children and their loved ones are being killed. And that is actually where the focus needs to be, this humanitarian failure that we now have in this situation. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, it doesn't matter whose agenda it is. Frankly, it has to stop. We cannot live in a world where this kind of violence and this kind of hatred is allowed to operate with what appears to be more or less impunity. And it is my sincere hope that as we move forward as a species that we can actually overcome this kind of human killing human situation. But again, if we're going to talk pie in the sky, that's probably quite close to the top of the list. So I want to finish this episode by just pulling it back to what I said at the beginning and remembering that in the Ukraine right now, people are suffering, right now people are dying, and whether we talk about the factors involved and we talk about the agendas involved, actually that's by the by. We have the luxury and the space to have those conversations. The Ukrainians do not. The Ukrainians are dying, the children are dying, their cities are being leveled, and that needs to be right at the front of this conversation. I'd love to know what you think. I would love to know what you feel is happening in the conflict, what factors you feel are the factors that need to be considered and looked at. Do tell me below in the comments what your feelings are about that. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Discourse Collective. It's a somber episode, admittedly, but I hope you found it interesting, and I will see you next time on the Discourse Collective.